You need GitHub Authentication in your FastMCP server, but don't want to build the OAuth flow from scratch. We'll configure the built-in GitHubProvider to handle the entire OAuth process, from redirecting users to GitHub's login page to validating the return tokens. You'll see exactly how to set up the required credentials and where these tokens fit into FastMCP's standard authentication system. From FastMCP, server, auth providers, GitHub import GitHubProvider. Auth equals GitHubProvider. Client ID equals your ID. Client secret equals your secret. Base URL equals https://yourserver.com. This demonstrates the OAuth provider pattern, where authentication complexity is encapsulated in a reusable component that handles the entire OAuth 2 flow. The GitHub provider abstracts token acquisition, validation, and user identity resolution through GitHub's API, exposing a simple interface while managing secure token storage and refresh internally. Unlike manual OAuth implementations, this pattern lets you configure authentication with just credentials and a base URL, while the provider handles the protocol details. The pattern works by combining configuration with runtime API interactions. You provide static credentials, cliented, client secret, and deployment-specific settings, base URL for GitHub Enterprise, while the provider dynamically handles token requests, validation through GitHub's API endpoints, and user claim resolution. The opaque access tokens require API validation for each use, ensuring security without local token parsing, and user attributes become available through FastMCP's standard AccessToken system after successful authentication. This approach solves the problem of secure, standards-compliant OAuth integration without reinventing protocol handling. You avoid implementing token storage, refresh logic, or API validation while still getting production-ready authentication. The trade-off is framework dependence, but in return, you eliminate entire categories of security risks and edge cases that manual implementations typically miss. The pattern is ideal when you need GitHub authentication, but want to focus on application logic rather than OAuth mechanics. Let's break it down line by line. From FastMCP, server, auth providers, GitHub import GitHubProvider. This imports GitHubProvider, FastMCP's built-in OAuth 2 handler for GitHub authentication. It manages the OAuth flow, redirects, token exchange, and validation, using GitHub's API so you don't implement the protocol manually. The provider returns opaque tokens that require API calls to validate and fetch user claims, following GitHub's security model. Auth equals GitHubProvider. Initializes GitHub OAuth authentication using FastMCP's built-in provider. The cliented and client secret parameters establish secure credentials with GitHub's OAuth system, while base URL enables compatibility with GitHub Enterprise deployments. This provider handles the complete OAuth flow token exchange, validation via GitHub's API, and user identity verification, while exposing claims through FastMCP's standard AccessToken system. Client ID equals your ID. GitHub-issued OAuth client identifier that uniquely identifies your application to GitHub's authentication system. Required for the OAuth flow, this value comes from your GitHub OAuth app registration and must match exactly what's configured in GitHub's developer settings. Client secret equals your secret. This is GitHub's OAuth 2 client secret, required for the authorization code flow. It authenticates your application to GitHub's API, enabling secure token exchange after user consent. The secret must remain confidential. Exposure defeats OAuth security and risks account compromise. Base URL equals https://yourserver.com. overrides the default GitHub API endpoint to point at your GitHub Enterprise server instead of GitHub. Required for enterprise deployments, where the standard auth flow assumes the public GitHub API, this ensures OAuth requests hit your internal GitHub instance. The provider handles the full OAuth flow, but requires proper redirect path configuration for callback routing. Closing parenthesis finalizes the GitHub OAuth provider configuration with the required credentials and optional enterprise server URL. This provider handles the OAuth 2 flow with GitHub, including token validation through GitHub's API, while the actual token storage and user claims are managed by FastMCP's standard AccessToken system. For GitHub Enterprise, base URL specifies your self-hosted instance endpoint, while callback configuration is handled separately via the redirect path parameter. GitHub OAuth provider pattern. The GitHub provider handles GitHub's opaque OAuth tokens by abstracting the validation API calls behind FastMCP's standard AccessToken interface. The redirect path parameter controls callback URL matching, not base URL, which is only for GitHub Enterprise deployments. This provider demonstrates how FastMCP standardizes different OAuth implementations through a consistent token interface.
The opaque token that must ask another system to be understood becomes transparent to the client that receives it.